Great to see you today. I hope you are very well. A very special programme. The Southport triple murderer is sentenced today. So just what motivates such evil? I'll be asking TV psychologist Emma Kenny, who'll be dropping a few truth bombs about this twisted monster. Plus, is Suella Braverman right that Reform and the Conservatives are going to have to work together to dump Sir Keir Starmer out of Downing Street at the next election? I'll be asking the former deputy chairman of the Tory party in just a few minutes. But first, my hot take. I'll tell you what I think we've lost. The sense that the citizens of this nation own their own country. Perhaps that feeling of disconnection dates back to our membership of the European Union and the idea that there are wider forces, a greater authority that rules over us and determines our destiny. It was certainly a desire to control the borders, restore sovereignty and get our country back that led to Brexit. It was the people flexing their muscles and reminding Brussels bureaucrats who the real proprietors of this project actually are, you and me. Whilst I detest nationalism, which says that one country is better than another, which is divisive and often leads to war, nationhood, on the other hand, is a precious thing. Nationhood is about a community based around shared values, history and experience. But you can't have nationhood without a nation. And this precious idea has been chipped away at in recent years with the globalist project of vast legal and illegal immigration. Now, Britain has always been a glorious melting pot, a successful, diverse society. And a sensible inflow of people who adapt to the British way of life has been our story so far. Britain is an island geographically, yes, but through history, one populated from across the planet. But the scale and rate of change in recent years has effectively been the theft of a country from its own people. How immeasurably thick do you have to be to not understand that legal net migration of almost 1 million people in a single year, that's more than the size of Leeds or Liverpool, is going to impact our infrastructure, our public services and the welfare bill, not to mention a crisis of integration that is inevitable with such numbers. The corporate, political and media elite haven't allowed us to talk about these things until now because it would be far right or something like that. But the challenges posed by this effective open borders policy are there for all to see. Migrant hotels, which decimate small towns and cost £8 million a day or £3 billion a year. And that's a drop in the ocean compared to the real cost to the nation when the majority of these folks inevitably fall dependent on the state. Now, I'm working on a Mark Dolan show exclusive at the moment with a top lawyer in the Northwest who's told me that individuals responsible for some of the worst crimes imaginable are now giving the opportunity in court to have their charges translated into their own language at vast expense to the taxpayer. At any given time, this legal insider has told the Mark Dolan show that lawyers are now working with up to 27 different languages. And this is to accommodate people who have done bad things to British citizens. The taxpayer pays for an interpreter for every hearing, and many of the suspects can speak English perfectly before the trial, but as soon as they go to court, they suddenly cannot speak English at all and need an interpreter. I wonder why that would be. All hearings have to be conducted in their own language. This, as well as legal aid, is a huge cost to you and I. No matter how many repeated crimes are committed, I'm told that these people, these dreadful individuals, continue to receive this legal aid, and cases are often delayed because an interpreter fails to turn up. My contact tells me that the system is basically financially and morally bankrupt. Well, we know about multiple translation services in the NHS as well, don't we, which cost a fortune when what we really need is a few more doctors and nurses. Now, let me be clear. I welcome immigration. I'm the son of immigrants myself. A number of sectors would fall over overnight without fabulous people coming to the UK and making a huge contribution, as I like to think that my parents did in the 1960s. Not to mention, for example, the Windrush generation, without whom the NHS would not be what it is today. So sensible, manageable numbers are not just acceptable, but welcome, particularly if you have skills to offer this country. But I've got 3 rules. You have to work, you have to follow the laws of the land, and you have to speak the language. Why is that even controversial in this clown world of 2025? Now, there are plenty of Brits who commit awful crimes and they must be apprehended and punished. In fact, statistically, they are the majority, obviously. But the link, as pointed out by Professor Matthew Goodwin on his Substack, between immigration, lack of integration and violence is impossible to ignore. For example, look at the horrific triple murder of 3 little girls in Southport at the hands of the heartless monster Axel Ruder-Cabana, who's being sentenced this week for his horrific crimes. The authorities spun a warm tale that he was a cute Welsh choir boy, but in fact was a dangerous psychopath who had been making poisonous bioweapons at home and was in possession of an Al-Qaeda training guide. Doesn't sound much like a Welsh choir boy to me. Now, his parents came to the UK as immigrants from war-torn Rwanda. Obviously, they've not committed this awful crime, but people's family background is now a matter of national security, whether woke journalists or politicians like it or not. A case in point is the lone Afghan knifeman in Bavaria, Germany this week, killing a 2-year-old toddler and a 41-year-old man, injuring 2 others. The location? A kindergarten group in the park. It's no accident that these thugs go for our children, because they want to take what is most precious to us. And these monsters target a Taylor Swift dance class, an Ariana Grande concert, a satirical magazine in Paris, and Christmas markets. These are all things that represent Western traditions, the Western lifestyle, the Western way of life. And we've imported folk and ideologies that hate all of it. This is a conversation that we're now allowed to have, and we need to have. And for the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, to focus on how Ruder-Cabana managed to buy a knife is misdirection and obfuscation so bad as to be wicked. Calling this monster the Amazon killer, because that's where he bought his knives, is gaslighting his victims and making absolute mugs of the rest of us. Well, we're not going to put up with it anymore. The truth will always find its way through, like water through a leaky roof. Like the fact that London, our great capital city, which is turning into a lawless hellhole, is now home to 500,000 illegal immigrants. That is 1 in 12 of the London population in our great city illegally, with the new estimate suggesting that more than 1 million people are living illegally across the whole of the UK, having either entered the country illegally or having outstayed their visa. And various governments of all political persuasions have allowed this to happen. What do we pay our taxes for, if not to protect the integrity of our borders, the integrity of our community, the integrity of our nation? Drastic and radical change is needed now. But we won't get it under this woke Labour government and a former human rights lawyer in our Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who barely seems to believe in borders at all. Whoever replaces Labour in 4 years' time will be responsible for the biggest single policy shift in 100 years, and it can't come too soon. Immigration at the right pace is a public good. It is the story of these islands, but it must be legal, orderly, and come bound with duties and responsibilities. A life in Britain is a huge privilege, not a blank cheque. Britain belongs to the British people, a fact lost on those who govern us. Now, before we carry on, to watch the whole show ad-free, head to The Mark Dolan Show on the Substack app or go to markdolan.com. Now, following the sentencing of Southport triple murderer Axel Ruder-Cabana, just what inhabits the mind of somebody capable of such violence and cruelty? Now, I have it on good authority that the detailed nature of his crimes are indescribable and can perhaps only be summed up with words like medieval or barbaric. So how can a human being do something like this? Where do they get to mentally to be able to inflict such damage? To answer this, I'm delighted to welcome TV psychologist, best-selling author and broadcaster Emma Kenny, who's had huge success with her live theatre shows, The Killer Next Door, and her book of the same name. She can be found at emmakennytv.com. Hi, Emma.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Emma, if we were offered £1 trillion, we couldn't perform these acts, even on our worst enemy. So what's going on inside the head of a mass murderer like Axel Rudy Cubana?
When I think about this case in particular, it makes me think about very similar cases, cult-orientated cases. So when individuals have been, shall we say, lacking some purpose, lacking a sense of belonging potentially, feeling unhappy with the world around them, having an entitled sense of what they feel they should be having happen to them in the world. And all of a sudden, they get interested in figuring out what could make them belong. And then they start looking for certain things that could represent that potential change that they're looking for. And they connect, in a way, with a malevolent force that then takes advantage of their desperation to be somebody, to be visual, to be seen. And this is where we see cult-like behaviours becoming really problematic. Think about the Manson family, for example. And even though we're talking about a very different individual here, in a different time zone, there is similarities, there are parallels, because certainly I think if we were honestly to be given the information that we should be given, and if there was transparency, which we might not be afforded because of course he's gone guilty, we would see that that had been something that had been happening over a period of time. And ultimately, people like him are similar to people all around the world. They're individuals seeking purpose, believing they're the good person, and acknowledging that they have a set of beliefs and a code being reinforced by people outside of the network that they're, shall we say, in contact with directly, so online, for example, and then finally getting into a position where they're so convinced that what they believe in is the right way that they will act in the most abhorrent ways. I think most people will think that this individual is mentally unwell, and it gets me really angry that there's constantly this trope about mental illness, as if people who are mentally unwell would go around stabbing and brutalising children, which is what happened. No, to do something like that, you have to have a conviction psychologically. You have to believe there is a reason behind your actions that you're entitled to. And it's warped and it's depraved and it's despicable and it's just tragic beyond belief. But it comes from that almost mindset that cults enforce, which is we are right, the world is wrong, and you have to take action. Otherwise, you are the failure that you always feared you would be.
So Rudy Cubana could conceivably consider himself to be the good guy and on the side of right.
100%. 100%. Now, like I said, the problem with this case, legally, is because he's gone guilty, I would imagine they're going to withhold as much as possible. There may be an inquiry, that inquiry might reveal things, but I think the all-time trust in the authorities right now is dead. And it's not dead because people are conspiracy theorists. It's not dead because people are arrogant enough to believe that they are better than the authorities and no more. It's dead because we've recognised that there are cover-ups and trust has been misplaced and displaced, and it leaves us with a sense of we are being kept from the truth. And the problem with keeping us from the truth is it leads to more theories about the problems that people are encountering in their lives and what's happening in their communities. And transparency is what's required, but I don't know whether we're going to get it. And I think if we did, certainly with the referrals to Prevent, you know, he was referred 3 times to Prevent. It was considered and deemed that he wasn't somebody going down that path, even though he'd actually said to people he wanted to be a school shooter, for example. So this is somebody who absolutely was saying, I want to be seen, I want to be notable, I want to have people validate me. And he will have found that online. Because the thing about, shall we say, terrorist organisations is they are love bombers. They make you feel seen, they make you feel heard, they make you feel valued. They tell you you are the most important person in the world to them. And when you don't have a voice, often people will go down that road because they feel, well, finally, somebody sees me as this amazing human being. And so, of course, they think they're the good guys. Because to actually ultimately be able to be capable of that pure evil, you either are a pure out and out serial killer, psychopath, mass murderer, or you are somebody who believes you are doing the right thing that will give you your blessings at another point in time. Let's say, for example, once your life is over in this life.
Is it surprising that this killer is so young?
No, because young people are the most malleable, the most vulnerable, the most susceptible. The brain doesn't even finish forming up until the age of 25. So look back at who you were when you were 17. Listen, when I was 17, I knew everything. I was confident as hell about my beliefs. I was vegan, and whilst I'm vegetarian now, I'm not as strict. I think I turned more people to meat when I was a vegan back then because I was so angry. And so because of that culmination of feeling, confidence, desire, purpose, and looking for people who can advise you, who you see as mentors and can be powerful around you, of course, those are very, very alluring qualities to kind of mix together. So no age, whilst we have an empathy with age, that's why the law, for example, would not give him a whole life tariff. You won't get a whole order because of the fact that he is 17 when he committed this crime. We believe people can change. The truth is that your brain, etc., is against you to some degree in that moment. So I would absolutely say that at 17 years of age, you are hyper dangerous because you're not consequential. You're not thinking about what you can do and the impact it can have. You're acting in the moment.
Can somebody like this be cured? If he's not going to spend the rest of his life in jail, can he be rehabilitated?
I don't care. I don't care if he can be rehabilitated. I don't believe that he has a right. I think that the UK British system of the way that we deal with the law in certain circumstances is ludicrous. I don't believe certain killers who have done heinous crimes and murders should ever have the right, no matter how old they are, to walk the streets again. And that isn't because I don't think that rehabilitation can be possible, it's that I don't believe we should take the chance. If you can be radicalised, and no matter what people are saying out there, and there are these people online, for example, really on his side to some degree, trying to find reason behind his actions, saying it's not fair to call him a terrorist. This is terrorism. It's obvious it's terrorism, and it's obvious that he will have been radicalised because his actions clearly denote that he was going down that path. To try to say, well, these Al-Qaeda manuals you can get online. Yes, you can, because people are getting radicalised online. You don't just happen to get one, download it, and have a poster on your wall of it, for example, because you're not interested. You're interested in it. So for me, the life sentence, which will have a minimum term without a doubt because of his age, it's not enough because you can never say that it won't be possible for him to be radicalised again. And the British system right now is not the best at rehabilitating high-level offenders who are violent. We have a huge rate of return, and whilst he'd be on licence for the rest of his life, why would we ever take a chance? He killed little girls. He made a choice, and even if he, in 30 years, is the most lovely human being that everyone likes being around in prison, and is doing a sterling job at helping others, we'll let him do that for the rest of his life. Because the thing is, he'll have a life, and those children don't have a life now. And neither do a lot of the families who have been massively affected. Their lives have been absolutely ruined as well.
Now, of course, anyone can commit the most awful crimes, but this individual's parents were immigrants from war-torn Rwanda. Is there a link between immigration, lack of integration, and violence?
I mean, if you are from a war-torn country that has endured horrendous trauma, trauma has a massive impact on who we are and who we become. So the most obvious route when you are traumatised is you become a sensitive, compassionate human being. That's clear. Most people who have horrible things happen to them and see horrible things are good people. But if you happen to have certain, shall we say, genetics interplaying with experience and socialisation and all these other things, and then you see trauma, that can be an activator of really negative behaviour. The more traumatised the person may be, the more likely they will have a propensity, if they have all the other factors, such as, shall we say, individuals who've had an unstable home, individuals who have been involved in crime early because their parents have needed money and food to survive, and all these things that kind of happen when you're in a war-torn country, for example, because you just need to get through the day. If you then come to a country where those things are not necessary, but it's part of who you are, then of course you are going to act in that way until you either get rehabilitated, get better options, or make different choices. But I would say absolutely, when you have a family who've had trauma, there is a higher propensity for you to be involved in political and experiential and emotional issues that relate to that.
Are the government and the media guilty of misdirection when they talk about the availability of knives and how this individual bought a knife?
Well, the government at the moment seem to have the worst PR and marketing. I don't know who is making the decision to put things in the press, but they should be sacked immediately because it does the absolute opposite. In fact, a really good rule of thumb would be for Keir Starmer to do the opposite of whatever is being advised, because it is literally absolutely going down the pan. It's like saying, are we going to have spoons then only? Because if you think that you can't walk into anybody's kitchen, any female's kitchen in the UK, for example, and get the butcher's block and drag out an enormous knife that you could do serious damage with to anybody, you are literally on some kind of other planet. Anybody can get hold of a weapon. Do I think there should be better regulation regarding who can get these knives online? Absolutely, because that would mean that at least we would have some kind of way of understanding who is buying them and potential tracking codes. But what you really have to ask is, if somebody has the mindset to murder, if somebody has the rage within to believe that they are justified in the kind of killing that they're going to carry out, they will find a way. The guy was making rice in. I mean, we're talking about something that was like attacks in Tokyo on subways, things that kill hundreds of people. He wasn't somebody who was bothered about a knife. He was bothered about destruction. And the reason that I find it really abhorrent that we haven't talked about the obvious nature of what he did, he went to a place to destroy something that symbolized Western females in particular. He went to a place where children, little girls, were meant to be enjoying a Taylor Swift experience, one of the most iconic women of the Western world at the moment, one of the most successful women of the Western world at the moment. And to destroy those children was a way of representing the rage that they feel about the Western world in general, and in particular, the, shall we say, liberalism of female form. So that in itself wasn't just about killing those beautiful kids. It was about a message of how feeling is towards a particular population. And it's really strange for me at the moment that you can't have those conversations because it's meant to offend people. It's like, good, it should offend people, because if you have those views, let's offend you. You need to re-educate yourself. Now, listen, I am not somebody who believes that everybody has to live the same life. I grew up in Manchester. I lived in Longsight in Manchester. You can't get a more diverse area. And we have loads of problems there. You know, when I was living there were lots of issues. But for the most part, we kind of got along. But, you know, did I expect the African people who were in traditional dress to dress like me? Did I expect the Muslim individuals to? No, that's fine. But did I expect everyone to cohesively connect and not have separate lives completely? Yes. And I think that until we can start to accept Western values and to recognise that that doesn't mean taking the worst of Western values. You can take the best of Western values. It doesn't mean that we can't have a cohesive experience of appreciating other people's cultures as well and taking the best of that. Let's take the best of it. But right now, that's not what happens. We've got real problems with the fracturing of our communities and the fracturing of our experience within those communities.
We do, and people living parallel lives in ghettoized cultures. The whole point about coming to the UK is, you don't have to give up your religion. You don't have to give up your language at home. You know, my folks came to the UK from Ireland in the 60s. They remained Roman Catholics. They didn't lose their Irish accent, but they did sign up to the British project and they became British people. And that's what's not happening now. My insiders tell me, Emma, that this guy was smirking and laughing when arrested. And some say that he was subtly trolling his victims whilst in court with his facial expressions and body language. Is this typical behaviour of a psychopath?
Well, not necessarily typical behaviour just of a psychopath, because psychopaths actually try their best to act in a certain way that's going to benefit them. So basically, if I was a psychopath in court and I want to try to get a minimum sentence that's going to be less than the maximum I could be given, I'm going to try my best to mimic in certain ways the way I'm expected to behave and seem sorry, for example, which is really important. Otherwise, there's aggravating factors that you don't show any remorse, for example. Psychopaths tend to be quite bright, so they know how to do that. But if you are somebody who is standing in court who believes that no one has a right to imprison you because your justice system, your people in authority, you mean nothing. You have no authority to me. The only authority I'm going to answer to is whatever God I'm following whichever belief system I've got. None of this matters. You don't matter. The victims don't matter. You're infidels, for example. That means that, of course, I'll smirk. Of course, I'll laugh, because I'm so brainwashed into a belief system that I'm better than, that I'm a chosen one. I've probably been told I'm all of those things as well. That essentially it does not matter to me what you think. In fact, I hope you think I'm a terrible person, because you just don't get it, right? So the psychology is more to do with that. And from the outside looking in, people will see him as an individual. And I don't have any empathy or any sympathy for this guy, don't get me wrong. But if you're looking at him as an individual, you don't see the truth. Because as an individual, it's just easy to say he's evil, he's malevolent, he's a psychopath, he's an individual who's just got darkness running through his bones, right? But if instead you say to yourself, this is somebody who has literally been manufactured. He has been made into this belief system where genuinely, if you do not think as he does, you are crazy, you are wrong, there is something broken about you. And if he's been brought in to believe this by fed the worst of the worst about our society, radicalized in a way where he thinks that we are horrendous examples of humanity, then he's going to show no respect for anybody. He's going to be proud of his work. And that's what's so terrible about the process that we see when these individuals go down this way and this route. And like I said, they're not going to come out and probably say he was radicalized by ISIS, for example, you know? They're probably not going to say that. But to anybody with an ounce of common sense, you can see all the hallmarks are there. And I think it's a shame that we're not having those conversations, because the truth is, he is no different than any other disenfranchised young person. Because disenfranchised young people are desperate for meaning and belonging. And unless we have these conversations and explore and explain and tell children and young people that in the bedrooms, it's as dangerous as being on the streets, you know, because people are reaching you. And unless parents are listening and thinking and finding out about what's going on in their child's lives, these things can happen. And so I think that's the wider message. And so when you see him in that courtroom laughing, sneering, smirking, not caring, well, it's because he's been promised something far greater than this breath of consciousness you and I are going to experience. He's been promised something far more important. And if he believes in that stoically, fully, nothing is going to change that, because he's done it. So if you've done this because you believe this, what are you going to do from now on? Are you going to rehabilitate, or are you going to dig deep and say, no, this is the choice I've made. This is my reward at the end. You know, life is a fleeting moment when you think about eternity, isn't it?
The sobering thought. The extraordinary Emma Kenny is the author of The Serial Killer Next Door. That's also the title of a live theatre show. Go and have a look at Emma's extraordinary videos on YouTube, or just head to emmakennytv.com. Emma, we'll catch up soon.
Anytime. Take care, Mark.
Now, the former Home Secretary Suella Braverman has said on her trip to America to see Donald Trump's inauguration that Reform UK and the Conservatives need to collaborate in some way in order to keep Labour out of power in 4 years' time. She wouldn't be led on the details: a coalition, a non-compete pre-election deal, a merger, or just confidence and supply. But she was very clear that the right must unite. So is she right? And is it even possible given the huge personalities involved? Let's get the views of former Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party and former MP, Jonathan Gullis. Jonathan, good to see you again.
Good to see you, my friend. How are you doing? Congratulations on this wonderful show.
Well, thank you. Listen, it's great to have you on here. It's a coup for us to get you. Do you think that the right should unite?
So, of course, I want to unite. My concern is that with what Suella said, albeit the details aren't fully available, essentially, I think that leads down to one path, which is if any merger took place, the reality is that if a deal's done that says in the interim that Kemi would remain leader, let's be perfectly frank, a merger would essentially lead eventually to Nigel Farage leading the Conservative Party into the next general election. So that's one big honest conversation that we need to have with ourselves is, are we prepared for that if that's what people wanted? And what would that do to members of the parliamentary party who may feel they can't serve under Nigel, members of our own party on the grassroots who feel that they don't want Nigel to be their leader? I think the problem is it would continue internal division. Secondly, I also think the non-aggression pact is also problematic, because if you say somewhere like Stoke-on-Trent North, where if you look at current polling, it would suggest that it's either Labour or Reform who are going to win in where I was proud to serve as the Member of Parliament. If I end up being told by Conservative campaign headquarters we're stepping down in Stoke North, no Conservatives running, what does that do to our councillors, our Conservative councillors, knowing that they're not going to have any door knocking going into elections? What does that do for our grassroots activists who are paid up members who go out and leaflet and sell the Conservative Party brand? Because if you essentially do that, eventually you'll lead to the destruction of those kind of associations and federations of our members. And that is something you can't just rebuild in a matter of years. It takes decades to build that kind of groundwork, constitution, foot soldiers, donations, and so forth. So it would spell the end of the Conservative Party in certain parts of the country, which I don't think would be a good thing either. So I think the problem here is the reality that either the Conservative Party or Reform is going to survive, and it's now a battle, which is a huge battle for Kemi to try and win in order to keep conservatism as we know it alive and kicking.
And why do you think that Kemi Badenoch might lose out in a face-off against Nigel Farage for the leadership of some kind of coalition?
Well, I think essentially the problem would be is that from the conversations I've had with members of the Conservative Parliamentary Party in particular, the level of complacency within the Conservative Party, including some grassroots members, but predominantly the Parliamentary Party, towards reform, I find quite astonishing and actually terrifying, to be perfectly frank. If you're in Parliament, you'll see there's only 5 members of Parliament who are reform. There's always comments about how often they're visible in the chamber, how often they get to speak, but of course we know that smaller opposition parties, it's always difficult to get cut through in Westminster. So it's the Westminster bubble trap of not seeing reform actively that you believe and convince yourself that therefore they're not a threat. What I don't understand is how Conservative MPs haven't realised that Nigel Farage just needs to go and make a video, shove it on TikTok or Facebook or Twitter, and it gets millions of views. So he can sell his message, his brand, his policies without needing to be in the chamber. In fact, I used to joke that I would go in the chamber and I'd be lucky for a video on Facebook to get 1,000 views. I do a Facebook live walking down the high street in Tunstall, I'd get 3,500 organic views. And obviously we've seen that with legacy media struggling, and obviously media forms like this now on YouTube and other formats now really thriving. So I think there's a real misconception in how it works. I think the other challenge, and the problem people haven't understood, is that there is, especially the Parliamentary Party, the anger still towards the Conservative Party is very, very high indeed. I sit in pubs and restaurants. I have people approaching me on the street and saying, "We wish you're MP, but we wish you hadn't been a Conservative." Because ultimately, even though people know this Labour Party has been a complete and utter disaster in government, the truth of the matter is they still haven't forgotten and forgiven our last 14 years. Sometimes I think unfairly. I think there's a lot of good things that we did do in those 14 years, but there's still a lot of anger towards it. And the problem that Kemi's got is that because Keir Starmer's popularity has plummeted and Labour Party's popularity has plummeted so quickly, she hasn't got, like Keir Starmer had, the 1 to 2 years to fix Conservative campaign headquarters, to get the money back in, to set up this policy advisors and look at the policy recommendations and slowly but surely put it together in private. It is now very much public, and Nigel's able to steal a lot of limelight, a lot of attention. And of course, Nigel is one of the genuinely authentic people in British politics. I think only Boris Johnson could beat Nigel Farage when it comes to charisma and natural oratory and engagement and just being personable with the electorate. And that's where Kemi, I think, would struggle. So I think that those factors is what I think leads, because I think the Conservative Party in 2025 in the local elections is going to have a very bruising time. But it'll be covered by the fact that we know that around 9 million people probably are going to have their local elections cancelled. So it'll be 2026 when reality dawns on the Conservative Party, where we might see Reform as the official opposition in Wales, albeit could well be the governing party of Wales. They might have 6 to 7 members of the Scottish Parliament and potentially have the largest vote share nationally across Scotland. They could have a mayor in Dame Andrea Jenkins in Lincolnshire. And they could have maybe 300 to 500 councillors. And if we see that, the pressure on Kemi as leader is going to be extraordinary to somehow come to some sort of deal, which, as I say, I think ends up with Kemi spelling the end of her own premiership. So I'd advise her against it personally. But because MPs particularly haven't been mentally preparing for that reality in the short term, the shock and the panic will kick in, as we saw when we were in government last and I was a member of Parliament. And they'll pin the blame on Kemi unfairly. And she'll end up suffering because Conservative MPs couldn't see the wood through the trees.
So, what I'm hearing from you is that some kind of merger or formal deal between Reform and the Conservatives spells the end of the Tory party as we know it.
Yes, that's exactly what I think it would be. And the cost of that would be potentially members of parliament not wanting to serve. It would mean membership potentially dropping, albeit, yes, you could argue that maybe some Reform members would join us, but actually, how many of those Reform members would want to join the Conservative Party? It would, be a huge rupture in British politics, and it would take time for that coalition to come together and heal and live with one another. And all that time, it would just be allowing Sir Keir Starmer continuing power, continued, another, well, his decade of renewal, as he always says. And I don't want to see Sir Keir Starmer, this disastrous Labour government, get another day longer than is necessary, because again, the right and particularly the Conservative Party somehow in some internal warfare, which the public is simply not interested in. We have to show that we're sorry, and we have to show that we mean it. And I think Kemi actually has done a good job of so far owning up to our mistakes. I think we then need to actually show we're credible opposition. I think we've seen that on the schools bill, which I know we'll talk about later,
Yeah.
in terms of actually forcing Labour into having to amend their own bill and actually highlighting severe issues with it. And then we've got to come up with credible policies that actually are deliverable and convince the public, which I think is going to be the hardest part, that if we're in power, we will unapologetically crack on and do the job that we were elected to do. And if we have to, do some uncomfortable things for the establishment, and that means looking at what America's doing. So, and actually, to be fair, what groups like the Looking for Growth group that Labour have actually been looking at, Dominic Cummings has been espousing. How do we limit judicial reviews? How do we get around the civil service procurement and bureaucracy? How do we actually slim down government, a bit like Millet, in the sense of making sure the state is not totally in our way all the time? And how can we actually just get on and deliver for the people? I think those executive orders, for example, that President Trump has been signing, albeit they'll be legally challenged, albeit that they don't necessarily actually force things, they are a signal to Congress, they're a signal to the Senate, they're a signal to the to the American electorate of his intention and that everyone needs to buckle up and join the ride. Otherwise, they're going to go up against him. And I think we need Kemi to demonstrate that she will go up against the lefty lawyers. She'll go up against the Labour Party. She'll go up against the House of Lords. She'll go up against the pressure groups like your Just Stop Oil, Greenpeace, and all that, and say no, common sense will reign supreme. And I think that's how it's going to be hard work. And by the way, you can do all of this, and there's no guarantee it'll actually end up working at all. But that is the severe risk. I've said on other platforms, I think the Conservative Party has 2 to 3 years to either live or die, and I really do mean it's in that perilous a position as far as I'm concerned.
And how do they live rather than die? Do they need to lean in to Trumpism and lean in to Reform UK? Because if that's the prescription, perhaps they chose the wrong leader in Kemi Badenoch and should have gone for Robert Jenrick, who sounds like a Reform UK MP.
So what I would say is that I find it utterly bizarre when people attack populists, because populist means you're popular, and I don't really understand why being popular is a bad thing in politics, particularly when you need to win the votes. Look, I think there's certain elements. I think, for example, net zero. I think Kemi's right to say that Theresa May ploughed ahead with net zero, but had no real plan of actually how we would get to net zero. So I think we need to say we're scrapping net zero. It doesn't mean we're not serious about looking after the environment, but let's double down on nuclear. Let's double down on carbon storage. Let's dig up the coal in Cumbria that we can use for steel production in this country. That would actually also create lots of high-skilled jobs. Let's drill, baby, drill in the North Sea in order to use that liquid gold beneath the waters of our United Kingdom so we can create those high-skilled jobs and bring down energy bills. But let's at the same time have a serious conversation about what we want to do with rewilding, for example, how that can be done in a sustainable manner. Let's seriously talk about how we can put rules around planning applications that say all homes must be built with solar panels and the developer is the one who initially takes the cost. Because if you make that some sort of rule, and this is just a rough idea, that would actually create a lot of want and desire in the market. It would help drive down the cost of these type of things. So, that classic supply and demand situation. So let's have a serious conversation. Let's scrap the electric vehicle mandate that the Conservatives so stupidly brought in, and actually I rebelled against in Parliament, because the reality is the grid is never going to be able to have capacity to deal with just solely electric cars. They're actually not very green. You know that. There's slave labour in China that's being used to build these particular things and get the natural resources out of the ground for them. So there's serious questions there. And then obviously on other things, on immigration, I think this is where we do need to probably as closely merge or follow essentially on policy with reform as possible. We need to have mass deportations, and that means leaving the European Court of Human Rights, which I put down a bill in Parliament to say that we should
Oh,
ignore
yeah.
and then eventually do, which got Sir Keir Starmer to actually come out of his office and vote against the backbench bill, which is quite rare. Those are the type of things that we need to see happen. I think and then on terms of the economy, Michael Gove actually said something to me once, and I thought it really struck a chord with me. Michael Gove said he'll always defend capitalism, but he won't defend corporatism. And I think we've ended up in a situation where our current economy is helping serve the bosses and directors of companies with huge payouts to shareholders, as we see in Thames Water. But in terms of that continued investment in the quality of the service and the infrastructure, we're simply not seeing it. We're simply not getting the benefit of it. And I think we need to rigorously say, and this is a bit Pierre Poilievre, in fact, of what we've seen in Canada, that he is willing to stand up for working men and women in the country and say to the multimillionaires, we want you, we need you, we're not here to hammer you, but you have a responsibility. The man, people who used to run the Cadbury's factory, obviously also built the homes for their workers and gave them the schooling and education and healthcare. It looks so contrarian. We've got 3, 4 generations working the same potteries factory because the way their families have always been treated. In fact, one of them, the CEO, went from the shop floor as an apprentice all the way now to the CEO of a multi-million-pound company. So that shows you the loyalty that can be found. That's at Churchill, China. So that's the kind of capitalism I'm passionate about. Yes, we need to make money. Yes, we want to make sure the businesses flourish. Yes, the business is what creates growth, not the government. But the businesses also have a responsibility to make sure they do look after their workers, they do invest in their communities, they reinvest in new and exciting technologies in order to drive productivity, drive growth, and drive the skills of their workforce.
Okay, I want to get onto Labour and education in just 1 second. One final thought on reform versus the Conservatives. If Kemi Badenoch is able to recover ground and reinvent the Conservatives, and hopefully she's got the balls to announce a bold policy platform that Britain needs, like you mentioned, potentially scrapping net zero, ending illegal immigration unilaterally, and also getting legal net migration down to very, very low levels. Assuming all of that is achieved, and that's a big if, what about the mathematics at the next election? Reform aren't going anywhere. So how do you see it playing out, even if the Tories recover?
I think it's going to be a huge challenge for the Conservative Party to even get back into government anyway. I think our best hope is that we can get to sort of 220 to 250, which would put us, not too dissimilar numbers to 2005. And then what I hope is that rather than do the classic thing of going, oh, we need a new leader because we didn't win, bearing in mind we've got 121 MPs, so again, the red flashing lights need to be on in people's heads in Parliament. We would stick with Kemi, seeing that we've already made a huge gain in picking up those seats. And potentially, if Reform have got the 80 to 100 that some people suggest they could get, then maybe there's an opportunity to do a coalition deal if Labour are indeed the largest but is still a minority party. Because I would be able to argue, how can Labour continue to govern when they've got such a whopping majority and it's been so overwhelmingly rejected by the electorate? Now, again, that would be a challenge. Whether it's a supply confidence deal, I don't know. But I think the reality is the Conservative Party need to be aware it's going to be monumental to have a chance of winning at the next election. A lot of that is also going to rely on mistakes being made by Labour and Reform and Lib Dems in order for us to win seats. But what we can control, as you say, is a policy agenda that is eye-catching, that is deliverable, that is believable, and quite frankly, MPs or candidates for the Conservative Party literally sign up to on a contract on the key policies, some of the most controversial ones, and say that they will vote for this, and if they don't, they will lose the Conservative whip. When Boris Johnson took the whip off those MPs over Brexit, that was the best show of strength I'd seen in a leader for a long time, and Kemi's going to need to have that kind of steel and backbone and people behind her to deliver that, because ultimately, if we have dissent in our ranks again, the Conservative Party will look like a out-of-touch, outdated Westminster Party that is for the days. The public, as you say, Mark, and you said it for a long time, are desperate for change. Labour didn't win the last election. It was an anti-Conservative vote that got Labour into government. The Conservative Party didn't win the election in 2019. It was an anti-Corbyn, pro-Brexit vote that got people like me elected in my kind of seats. So let's be perfectly frank about this, that we are in a situation where we need to make conservatism sound sexy, sound exciting, sound interesting, and actually believable and deliverable, and how it will work in the interest of people. And again, you've got El Salvador, where I think Bukele on law and order is doing some fantastic things. locking up gangs. We know who are the county line gangs members. We know who are the consistent repeat offenders that drive loads of our crime. Let's bang these people up for longer. We need to look at Millet. How's he slimming down the state and making sure that it doesn't get in the way of productivity and growth and actually supports business. Let's look at Donald Trump taking on the establishment. Let's look at Pierre Poilievre, who I believe will be the next Prime Minister in Canada, of how he's completely transformed the Conservative Party into being a party of the working man and the working woman. He's picking up blue-collar votes like no one's ever seen before. There is a precedent being set out there that we can look and learn from, but it's going to take a lot of looking into our souls, understanding where we went wrong, and for some Conservative MPs, particularly those who are deemed to be on the left of the Conservative Party, to suck up. There might be some things they're uncomfortable with, but if they want to have any sniff of government again, then they're going to have to make do.
And if not, join the Liberal Democrats. Jonathan, can I ask you about your appraisal of Labour's education policies? They're clearing up a Tory mess, aren't they?
Well, it's hilarious, isn't it, that they say this, yet education standards were actually improving. Yes, they'll go to the pandemic and where we saw a drop in outcomes. By the way, it's the same in Wales, it's the same in Scotland, it's the same in the OECD. In fact, guess what? England still remained miles ahead of the OECD average and Wales and Scotland when it comes to education outcomes. But this was not unique to this country. It was an issue around the world because we stupidly shut down schools and told kids to sit at home and didn't have enough high quality teaching online or in person, which meant that lots of students fell behind. It's one of the things I'm actually most angry about in our time in government. And it's certainly something I would never, ever do again if I was ever fortunate enough to be a member of parliament in the future. So Labour's come in. We've now got the fourth best readers in the world, the best in the West. And I think Catherine Burblesing, the fantastic head teacher at Michaela, said the right thing in her letter to Bridget Phillipson, which is a pretty scathing appraisal of her policy, which is, what is the question you're trying to answer? I don't understand what she's trying to achieve by telling academies they won't have the right to choose how much they want to pay staff. Why is it that, for example, as Michaela have said, that they've got an ex-veteran who they've paid a lot more than national pay bands would normally need to be paid to come in as a sixth form or head of sixth form, I believe. Imagine someone of that veteran, what they can offer that young person. There's other schools that have talked about the fact that they've hired outstanding nursery managers to become their head of Key Stage 1. Now, again, they've had to pay more than what national pay bands would say because these are unqualified teachers. But guess what? The outcomes are improving because that person is an expert in their industry. So by saying that you can't hire people unless they've got qualified teacher status, it's going to limit the availability of the best business people, the best doctors, the best nurses, the best engineers, the best veterans to come into the profession. Then you're saying that they won't have the ability to pay them what they want, albeit now Labour, let's say, have amended their own bill after pressure from the Conservative Party to say that it's now a pay floor, not a pay ceiling. I mean, I'll check the detail. I don't believe it. And then, of course, they also then want to do the national curriculum. So we're going to have some communist style. This is what you will learn in every school, in every part of the country. God forbid that Stoke teachers use their history lessons to teach the kids of Stoke the history of the potteries. God forbid that we don't allow people in the Highlands to learn about geography naturally, organically on their doorstep. God forbid we don't allow, obviously in London, for example, access to those FTSE 100 companies, a different kind of maths curriculum that may be tailored towards the workforce. It goes against actually Andy Burnham, who did a great piece of work in Greater Manchester. And I know it will shock you, Mark, for me to praise a Labour politician. But Andy Burnham worked with business and said, what are the jobs that you're creating for the future? They came back with a report. He then got those businesses to work with colleges and secondary schools and primary schools to say, what is it you need to be doing to prepare those pupils for the future to take up those jobs in our local area so we retain local talent? And they've got the MBAC now, as they call it in Greater Manchester, and that is local leaders, local businesses and local educationists working together to make sure we have an education system that's fit for purpose, that is rigorous and will get the kids the necessary skills and educational standards they need, and will allow them to get the high-skilled jobs in their communities that will help boost their local economies in areas that are often deprived or left behind. And Labour wants to rip up all that good work because they want to clearly control what our children learn. And bearing in mind this is the same Labour Party that didn't really oppose drag queens going into schools and reading outrageous books, or pushing the very dangerous gender ideology, pushing the very dangerous idea that white privilege is a real thing, which is absolutely for the birds. Tell a Stoke kid that white privilege exists. We're one of the 5 poorest areas in the United Kingdom. You know, this is the kind of stuff that will slip through the net, and the Labour Party simply will keep their hands away from it because they don't want to upset their union paymasters. The fact that unions put out a tick list of all the things they achieved, tells you everything you need to know. I consider Bridget Phillipson, alongside Ed Miliband, the joint most dangerous person in this government. Because what she'll do to the future of our children is going to destroy educational progress, destroy educational outcomes, and actually lead to a dumbing down that we saw in the last Labour government, which the Conservatives had to fix. It's an abomination, and it is vandalism, as Kemi rightly pointed out.
Well, that's right. They've got rid of the one word Ofsted inspection, and that means less choice for parents, less information. The teaching unions were behind school closures and now want to reduce the number of tests that happen in the classroom as well as exams. And Bridget Phillipson, when invited to congratulate Michaela Community School, which welcomes children from very poor, deprived backgrounds, multi-ethnic, and gets them into Oxford and Cambridge, the Education Secretary would not congratulate the head teacher, Catherine Birbalsingh.
Isn't that disgusting, Mark, that we have a head teacher who's had severe threats to her own life and safety, who has had every attempt from Labour councils in her area of Brent, because she teaches near Wembley Stadium, to shut down her school, has always been told, oh, let's see the results. She's just strict. She doesn't produce results. Then year on year on year is getting kids on average 2 grades higher than they're predicted to get. That is astonishing, by the way, in the education profession. That's the average child getting 2 grades. Like you say, taking kids from a deprived part of North London to get them into Oxford and Cambridge, actually beating some of the very best grammar schools and private schools in the country too with her results. And yet they can't say well done. They can't congratulate her. Now, Catherine is not exactly a friend of the Conservative Party. She's said her fair share of quite robust things to us when she's wanted to. I know Catherine well, been into her school a number of times to see what she's done. And let's say when Catherine's challenged me, it's you don't want to be on the wrong end of it. But it's always done from passion and from knowledge. And I spoke to Catherine, Mark, and it will shock you to know that the Secretary of State for Education has not even bothered to visit Michaela. Now, you'd think when you go into your department, you would say, I want to see the very best schools from across the country. And of course, Michaela would be one of the top 5. And yet the Secretary of State, like you say, has not wanted to congratulate Michaela, not wanted to visit Michaela, in fact, not even ever written or tried to speak to Catherine Birbalsingh, the head of Michaela, because she's still so hell-bent, clearly, on ideology. She's so hell-bent on actually playing up to her union paymasters. She's so hell-bent on thinking about birthday parties that Lord Ali spends 14 grand on in order for her to try and woo the left-wing establishment in the education system, which I just think sounds quite tragic, to be perfectly frank. And actually, you know what, Mark? I just don't think she actually understands her brief. I know people will say that's rude, but I just don't think she actually has a clue what she's doing. I don't think she understands teachers. I don't think she understands the education system. I don't think she spent enough time with the right people to actually understand it. And like you say, it's not just Catherine. It is multiple different academy leaders, trust leaders of all stars and stripes when it comes to their political allegiances, saying what you're doing is ripping up a consensus of both Labour and Conservative for the last 20 years, where we know, and I thought Siobhan McDonoghue, the Labour MP, was so brave to stand up in the chamber and really rip into this schools bill, ripping up, because let's not forget, it was to his credit, Tony Blair, who used the London Challenge as a footprint to start introducing the academy style system. Now, yes, we then put it on steroids, and I hope that a Conservative Party would commit to academising every school in the future, that we would lift the ban on grammar schools and allow grammar schools to come back through the free school programme where they could apply and be set up to have real competition and real choice in communities and to really drive standards up in our education sector.
Most definitely. I mean, Tony Blair, to a degree, stood for freedom, choice and autonomy. And that was obviously the essence of the free schools programme, academies, all the rest of it. Labour, the new incarnation of Labour 2.0, are quite the opposite. Now, Jonathan, you left the House of Commons in July after making a huge mark in frontline politics. Do you miss the place?
I do miss it. I miss it because what I loved doing was being in the chamber, which is why I was in there all the time. I think I made 760 contributions in my time. I think I spoke more than a 2019 elected person, so first time elected in 2019, which won't shock you, Mark. I'm a bit of a gobby so I accept that. But I loved it and I missed it because I love standing up and speaking with passion and genuine authority on behalf of the constituents I was proud to serve. And despite what people on X said and despite what certain media outlets on the left have said, and tried to sort of make me out to be something that I'm not, and you know that from us knowing each
Correct.
other, that I was saying the things my constituents wanted me to say and standing up for the values and the views of my constituents. And I'll never, ever be apologetic for that. Now, did I need to go and have every fight with the Labour Party all the time? I probably could have taken a back seat slightly occasionally. I could have, just to spare myself a little bit of grief. Could I have maybe not been as colourful in my language? Yeah, I could have been. But you know what? That wouldn't have been me. And I'm a big believer that I thought people want genuine authenticity in their politics. And I'm not sorry for who I am. I'm not sorry for what I believe in. I'm not sorry for standing up for the views and the values that I have, which is what my constituents have in Stoke-on-Trent North. And albeit, yes, people go, but you can't have agreed with you. They sacked you. Look, I know they sacked me, but Labour got 200 fewer votes in this general election than they got in 2019. Their vote share only went up by 5%. Mine went down 24%, and Reform picked up 18%, and there was 8% fewer people who turned out to vote. It was a failure of the Conservative Party to deliver on the promises they made nationally that what cost me that election. And whilst I ruffle feathers of Labour folk in Stoke, I know a lot of independent-minded people who aren't have any allegiance to any party were grateful, and now they tell me all the time they miss having someone who actually stood up and spoke up for them, because my successor, they say, has gone into hiding since he got elected.
You were very vocal in the Commons. You were deputy chairman of the party, and you were very committed to your constituents. Do you fancy another crack in 2029?
I would like to come back. I would like to have another go. But I've first of all got to get back on the candidates list, and we're waiting for Conservative campaign headquarters to tell us that process as ex-MPs, how that would work. Normally, there's an interview and there's some Q&A and some sort of deep diving into how much maybe of a pain in the backside we were to the leader of the time, to see if we can go back on the list. Look, then I've got to find an association that's willing to take me on, and maybe that'll be Stoke North, maybe that'll be elsewhere. Who knows? But all I know is that in the future, I would like to have another go. I'm not dead set on it being 2029, to be honest. I've got a young family who have suffered enough with me being away Monday to Wednesday and then out at weekends. I'm obviously looking for a sort of new career, an exciting, hopefully new career, and I might be fortunate enough to do quite well in that. And so again, I want to make sure that I can give my family the security, particularly financially going forward as well, that they deserve, to make sure they have every advantage that I want to be able to give them, that my family were able to give me through all the sacrifices they made as well. And look, the benefit is, despite looking much older than I am, I'm only just turned 35. So the beautiful thing in politics, actually, and if Donald Trump teaches us anything, is you're never too old. So I've got time to consider the options of the future, but I would hope that there would be an opportunity to return to the Commons, to speak up for a community and a country. And I like to think that I do speak for the silent majority in large ways. And I've always found that, again, don't worry about the bandwagon jumpers on social media who try to put you down, because if they're just insulting you, as Margaret Thatcher said, if they haven't got anything nice to say about you, that means you must be doing something right.
Definitely. Listen, you're 35, you're an absolute baby, and I'm very jealous because you're still young enough to pull off wearing a hoodie as you are in this interview. Listen, before I let you go, I was shocked to hear that you've been denied certain work opportunities since leaving the Commons. What's happened, and are you optimistic now about replacing your income having ceased to be an MP?
So look, I'm very fortunate that after the election, I actually became the campaign manager for Priti Patel, and that enabled me to earn a bit of money in that time as well. And I was delighted to support, most importantly, someone who is a very dear friend who is regularly in contact with me and looking out for me. Very fortunate to have people like that. It's a side of Priti Patel no one knows about. She's the most generous, warm-hearted, and
Yeah.
kind individual. She texts me on my children's birthdays and sends presents for them. Albeit she's no obvious family relation. I think that shows you the type of person that she is. I've obviously done a bit of consultancy work, sort of the odd project here and there. But yes, look, it has been a challenge for myself and a number of colleagues, particularly Conservative colleagues, who have left. And actually, I must say, also colleagues on the left of politics. I know Sam Tarry and Lloyd Russell Moyle reasonably well. They've said that they've been struggling too, having been seen to be on the wrong end of the Labour Party. And obviously, being a Conservative member in myself, a lot of colleagues are finding that certain businesses, the classic public affairs kind of roles, are saying that they want people with Labour connections. Now, my job is to convince businesses that I'm worth rolling the dice on, that yes, I'm passionate, yes, I'm loud, but imagine if you could harness that for your business, your company, your cause, what that could do for you.
Yeah.
And obviously the natural skills that I understand how Parliament works. I got one bill presented all the way through to being passed into legislation. That's the auto-enrolment of pensions. I've also submitted private members' bills, about increasing fines on road grabs and landlords, protecting war memorials after we saw that Black Lives Matter protest try and burn the Union flag on the cenotaph. And a number, I've actually introduced a bill to make sure we could hold the trustees of multi-academy trust accountable by using part of the Ofsted framework to inspect them, so that you can take workload off head teachers, something actually, ironically, Labour is actually considering doing, which is, Bridget Phillipson wants to pick up the phone and actually learn something from someone who knows what they're on about. I'm more than happy to take that call. And then, and obviously to understand parliamentary procedure, and I'm fortunate enough to have friends genuinely across the House, some of whom are in the Labour Party and in government. So that's my job. And I think on the other side, we need business to take a punt on us. I think being an MP, you kind of 20 years ago, you could walk into most jobs. I think now, because we live in a digital age and because there's your views are on the record and your voting record, albeit normally heavily spun, what you actually vote for is on the record as well. I think there's a fear about how some in the company or some clients might react. And actually, I would say having an MP is a good thing because they have an awful lot of skills to possess. Not everyone's perfect, not everyone's good. And, like any business, you can hire and fire us at the end of the day. But I think that what you get from someone is that know-how, that understanding of how to communicate, how internally and externally, how to research, how to then frame an argument, frame a call, create a campaign, make a real impact and noise around your issue, your cause, your business. And I hope that someone will eventually take the punt. But it is tough. As I say, I've got a 4-year-old and a soon-to-be 3-year-old. I've got a wife who works incredibly hard. We're classic. You can save up, and MPs do get the 4 months salary when they lose. They do get statutory redundancy times 2. So you get enough to get you for what I'd say 4 to 6 months, and I'm fortunate enough to do that. But here I am now at the 6-month mark, and I'm doing the bits of media, doing bits of consultancy. But like anyone, I would like the knowledge and safety of having a regular income coming in, so I can show my family that we don't need to worry month to month about how we're paying for the basic bills and making sure the kids get everything that they want and deserve. So it's not a sob story. It's just me sharing what colleagues have said. It is tough, but you sign up to the job, you get the privilege of being a member of Parliament, you get that title, and so I think you should be bloody lucky to have even had the opportunity to have that profile. And now it's my job to try and convince people to take a punt on me.
Well, I think your 4 or 5 years in the Commons will stand you in good stead and will be judged very kindly by history. And you do have a huge skill set. So more power to you in starting a new career, albeit one connected to your previous time as a politician. And never say never, Jonathan, about a return to the Commons a few years from now. Once you've filled up the coffers like Boris Johnson, made a few quid, maybe clear that mortgage. Before you go, Suella Braverman cannot and will not rule out joining Reform UK before the election. Can you rule it out for yourself?
The killer question that every Conservative is getting at this moment in time. Look, I joined the Conservative Party as an 18-year-old. So nearly my entire adult life, almost 18 years, I've been a member of this party because I firmly believe in it and want to fight for its heart and soul. But I also believe that no party has a right to exist. You have to earn the right to exist. And like anyone, I will always fight for my causes. I don't expect to win every fight, but I will fight fiercely and hard for the future of the Conservative Party brand. But, let's see what happens in the future at the end of the day. I might be forced into it, Mark. Maybe Conservative and Reform do end up merging and I end up in whatever amalgamation of that is. The Conservative Party might choose to go in a certain direction that I just feel that doesn't represent my views and my values. And again, that'll be a decision I have to make. But I can absolutely tell you now, I am determined to fight for the heart and soul of the Conservative Party. I want Kemi to succeed and will fight for her to succeed because actually I think that she is exciting. I think she does represent a real change face in the Conservative Party. And I think if she can get that natural fighting spirit across more regularly and come up with the policies that people want to see, because people want a strong man, strong woman in leader, right? They don't look at Keir Starmer and go, there's someone I would who'd have my back if I was out on a night out and some random was starting me in a pub. I think Kemi's got that fighting spirit in her. And I think that therefore she should be and can be the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. But it's going to be an almighty task for her to achieve that. But I'm very fortunate. I will be honest. I know Nigel well. Obviously, I know Lee. I get on with them, both of them. I'm sure that they would love me to join so they can get their headline saying another defection. But as I say, that's not on the horizon. That's not on the horizon. I am fighting for conservatism to succeed in the Conservative Party.
Well, I would urge my viewers and listeners to keep an eye on what you're up to and your next move, Jonathan. So head to X, Gullis Jonathan is where you'll find Jonathan on X, and go to his website, which is jonathangullis.com. Jonathan, thank you for joining us on the Mark Dolan Show. We'll catch up soon.
Thank you, Mark. You take care, buddy.
Thank you so much for watching. Now, to see the Mark Dolan Show completely ad-free, a longer version of the programme, plus extra bonus content and live videos, and your chance to message me, then head to my Substack at markdolan.com.